The Dead Sea Scrolls are a gigantic collection of ancient writings that were hidden in desert caves for millennia. Preserved in small clay jars were some of the oldest biblical manuscripts ever discovered, along with a collection of other scrolls, writings that revealed the inner workings of a secret community, and an apocalyptic prophecy about a war at the end of time. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls revolutionized the field of biblical studies. But what did they actually say? How were they discovered? And who did they originally belong to? In this video, I want to take you on a journey through the Dead Sea Scrolls and explore the lost history of one of the most important discoveries ever made. The Dead Sea Scrolls are named after the location of their discovery. They were found in a series of caves near the Dead Sea, a low-lying salt lake between the West Bank and Jordan. Many of these caves are from a site called Qumran, which contains the ruins of an abandoned building. The story behind these ruins may give us hints as to why these scrolls were hidden for so long. Historians agree that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947 by a local shepherd. But like any good tale, this story has been told countless times, and with each retelling, certain details may have been, well, embellished. Regardless, I'll try to keep it to what we know. For millennia, the site of Qumran was largely abandoned, save for a few nomadic shepherds who wandered through the ruins with their grazing livestock. One day, a Bedouin man named Muhammad ed-Dib decided to stay a while. As he was passing through the ruins, one of his goats ran off to the nearby cliffs. Searching for his missing livestock, the man ventured towards a small series of caves. Thinking that his goat might be inside, Muhammad climbed the cliff and entered the cave. As the fire of his torch illuminated the cave, he noticed something unusual. Lining the walls of the cave were 10 ceramic jars that lay peacefully undisturbed. Opening one of the jars, he found inside a tightly wrapped scroll, and by the looks of it, it was remarkably well preserved. So much so that when he looked a little closer, he could make out writing. The shepherd left for the city of Bethlehem, where he managed to find a buyer. Unsure of its true worth, he sold them for around 7 Jordanian pounds, the equivalent of a few $100s today. Shortly after their purchase, news of this desert discovery began to circulate across Bethlehem and beyond. Soon, word of these Dead Sea Scrolls came to the attention of John C. Trevor from the American School of Oriental Research. According to his initial studies, these scrolls appeared to be very old and were written in an ancient Hebrew script. It was already proving to be a promising discovery, and if these came from only one cave, what else might still be out there? Soon, droves of archaeologists flocked to Qumran, eager to find more of these Dead Sea Scrolls. And they were not disappointed. With the help of the Bedouin shepherds, similar pots were discovered in 11 caves in total, each containing scrolls that were extraordinarily well preserved. These astonishing finds from the Dead Sea soon gained international attention. Adverts soon appeared in newspapers, like in the Wall Street Journal, which announced that these scrolls were on sale. This included the original scrolls, which were purchased by a university in 1954 for approximately $250,000, a figure worth millions today. It was a discovery to rival the tomb of Tutankhamun. All that remained now was to uncover the secrets contained within. The Dead Sea Scrolls proved to be a massive collection. In fact, around 900 individual manuscripts have been identified in total, although many of them had disintegrated into tiny fragments. It was the work of scholars to painstakingly piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. It was not an easy task. You see, there were thousands of these fragments, averaging a few centimeters in size. In fact, if you happen to be watching this on your phone, this is roughly their actual size. Once pieced together, scholars did what they do best. They categorized them. Around 40% of the scrolls resembled books found in the Bible, like copies of Genesis and Psalms. Another 30% were apocryphal writings, books that were quote-unquote banned from the Bible, like Enoch and Jubilees. But the remaining 30% were the most intriguing. They contain writings that were previously unknown to scholarship. This included texts that described a secretive religious community and apocalyptic visions of a great heavenly war. There was even a scroll made entirely of copper that lists the locations of lost treasure. But more on that one later. From an early point in their study, these scrolls were believed to be very old, likely from a period in Jewish history known as the Second Temple period. This theory was partially confirmed in the 1990s, when carbon dating analysis revealed that the material dates from the 3rd century BC all the way to the 1st century AD. That meant that these scrolls are among the oldest biblical manuscripts in existence. As a result, these ancient texts give us an unparalleled window into the history of the Bible and reveal a wealth of knowledge about the people who preserved them. Let's explore the contents of the Dead Sea Scrolls, starting with somewhat familiar territory. A large proportion of these texts closely resemble passages found in the Bible. Fragments of every Old Testament book were discovered at Qumran, with the notable exception being the book of Esther, likely because it was set in Persia and is the only biblical text that does not mention God's name even once. But of all the biblical scrolls discovered at Qumran, one of them stands apart from the rest, and that is the Great Isaiah Scroll. At over 7 meters, or 24 feet long, the Great Isaiah Scroll is one of the largest and most impressive ancient scrolls ever discovered. It has also been remarkably well preserved, with the original Hebrew writing almost perfectly legible. Like the biblical version, the Great Isaiah Scroll tells the story of the prophet Isaiah, who proclaimed God's judgment on the nation of Israel. But when you compare this text to a modern Bible, you'll notice something strange. It matches almost perfectly. Bar a few differences in spelling, the Great Isaiah Scroll is about 95% similar to the Book of Isaiah in the Bible. This strongly suggests that even back then, the text of the Book of Isaiah was largely fixed, and that after all these years, it has remained largely unchanged. Now, the Bible didn't descend from heaven as one finished book. Instead, scholars and priests alike have long known that the Bible was written over a very long period of time, and that each individual book was likely edited and re-edited by generations of different writers. And the Dead Sea Scrolls are proof of this process. You see, many of these ancient scrolls preserve texts that are slightly different to the ones we know today. Sometimes these changes are minor, like the height of the biblical giant Goliath. Other times, however, they can be rather major, like entire missing sections of the story. The biblical book of Samuel tells the story of Nahash, king of the Ammonites, and his reign of terror against Israel. Now, for many years, this story was a little confusing. You see, it kind of comes out of nowhere and doesn't really fit with the preceding narrative. But then came a version of the same story found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. This version of Samuel contains an entire extra paragraph that is missing from modern Bibles, one that documents the rise of King Nahash and his bloodthirsty campaigns. Scholars consider that this version is the older form of the story, and that somewhere down the line, a careless scribe must have accidentally skipped this paragraph while copying it down, likely because both paragraphs start off with the same words. It seems that this error went unnoticed and was passed down into the version of the Bible we have today. This intriguing discovery presented scholars with a dilemma. Should they edit the Bible to follow the historical version as per the Dead Sea Scrolls, or keep the text as it is, especially given that the Bible is a holy book? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Should modern Bibles be updated? Along with books we'd recognise from the Bible, many of the Dead Sea Scrolls contain books that didn't make it into the Bible. Most famous of these are fragments from the Book of Enoch, an early apocryphal book which tells the story of the Nephilim, a race of biblical giants that existed before the Great Flood. But maybe you knew that already. Other texts include one very unusual scroll known as the Genesis Apocryphon. It claims to be an expanded account of the Book of Genesis and contains additional scenes that were allegedly left out of the original story. The Genesis Apocryphon explores the events leading up to the Great Flood and how a fallen race of angels known as the Watchers turn against God in pursuit of human women. Elsewhere is the story of Abraham, and one lengthy section dedicated to the beauty of his wife, Sarah, with several passages describing her physical appearance. Apparently, it was essential to the plot. These scriptural texts from the Bible and the Apocrypha make up a large percentage of the Dead Sea Scrolls and reveal to us the kind of literature its owners were likely reading. Now, I use these terms biblical and apocryphal with caution, as it's important to remember that this is a label applied by modern standards based on which books ended up in the Bible. During the time of the scrolls, these categories didn't exist, and maybe they were all viewed as having some sort of authority. Now, hiding scrolls in a desert cave was a first century solution to a first century problem. Keeping your data safe today requires a much more modern approach. Like NordVPN, the sponsor of today's video. When I'm researching videos in public places like libraries or cafes, I'm sometimes cautious of the promise of free Wi-Fi. You see, some of them are fake hotspots designed to steal your information. With NordVPN, you can connect to thousands of secure servers from around the world with the protection of next-generation encryption. There are many benefits of using a VPN, and NordVPN's worldwide access also means that you can enjoy instant access to hundreds of streaming services from around the world. The best way to get started is through my exclusive deal. Use my link, nordvpn.com/HochelagaVPN, to get a 2-year plan plus 4 bonus months. It's also completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/HoChelagaVPN, or click the link in the description down below. Thank you, NordVPN. Alright, back to the scrolls. The biblical writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls are fascinating, but there are plenty of other writings in this collection, writings that were previously unknown before their discovery. So let's start off with a really unusual one, the Copper Scroll. This one is interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, it is made of metal instead of parchment, and so when it was discovered, it had to be carefully unraveled using a specialized saw. And then there's what's written inside. You see, when scholars translated this scroll, they realized that it wasn't a religious text at all. It was a treasure map, one that described a vast quantity of gold in the Judean wilderness. Each entry in the Copper Scroll begins with a different site. Quote, "In the fortress which is in the valley of Achor, 40 cubits under the steps entering to the east, a money chest and its contents, of a weight of 17 talents. Estimates do vary, but a talent is an ancient measurement of weight. Converted from biblical 17 talents is around half a ton of treasure. Now, before you pack your bags in search of lost gold, there's one problem. People have attempted to find these locations and have unearthed nothing. Well, nothing yet, at least. And there's another problem. Some of these descriptions are far from useful, like, quote, in the gutter which is in the bottom of the rainwater tank, in the water conduit of the northern reservoir. Sadly, as of this video, no one has discovered any treasure as promised by the Copper Scroll, assuming it exists in the first place. In the absence of any information, theories have spread like wildfire. Some believe that the Copper Scroll records the treasury of the Jerusalem temple, kept safe in the deserts of Judea. But with this lack of answers, we may never truly know. Among these new discoveries made at Qumran, several had something in common. They seemed to describe the inner workings of a secretive religious sect. Perhaps the most famous of these is the so-called Rule of the Community, which, among many things, outlines the rules and regulations of a group that call themselves the Community. One section of the text seems to describe an ancient initiation ritual. The candidates shall confess after them, saying, "We have sinned, we and our fathers before us," and all entering the covenant shall say after both the blessers and the cursers, Amen. As part of joining this secretive community, applicants must first give up all of their possessions and prove themselves worthy by living with the community for a trial period of 2 years in length. Only then may they be admitted into the group. According to this scroll, life in the community was one of contemplation and prayer, to follow God's law and study the ancient scriptures. But high standards were expected of all members, and some of their laws were very strict. Quote, "Whoever speaks foolishly shall be punished for 6 months. Whoever has drawn out his left hand to gesticulate shall do penance for 10 days. Ever since the discovery of these community texts, it has been assumed that they were the original owners of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But their origin remained somewhat unclear. So, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, some scholars believe they have found the answer. During the time when the Dead Sea Scrolls were likely written, the Jewish religion was very different than it is today. It was centered around a great temple in the capital Jerusalem that was rebuilt after the Babylonian exile in 516 BC. And it was during this Second Temple period that many different Jewish groups coexisted. You may have heard of some of the most famous, like the Pharisees and Sadducees, both of whom appear in the New Testament. But there is another group that often goes overlooked, a group known as the Essenes. The Essenes were a reclusive religious sect that were found throughout Judea. Many of them retreated to the countryside to live in tightly knit monastic communities, far removed from the corruption of civilization. Some of our best descriptions of the Essenes come from the contemporary historian Flavius Josephus, who described them as follows. These Essenes reject pleasures as an evil. These men are despisers of riches, and so their community of goods raises our admiration. For it is a law among them that those who join them must let what they have be common to the whole order. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were first translated, there seemed to be many similarities between the community texts and descriptions of the Essenes, especially the rule about giving up one's possessions to join the group. In fact, other accounts of the Essenes seem to match the community found within the Dead Sea Scrolls, including one description by the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, who wrote about one community that lived near the Dead Sea. On the west side of the Dead Sea, but out of reach of the noxious exhalations of the coast, dwells the Essene people, a solitary tribe, marvelous beyond all others in the whole world, without women, renouncing love entirely, without money, and having for company only the palm trees. Although he does not specifically mention Qumran, Pliny's description of an Essene community near the Dead Sea strengthened the suspicion that the scrolls were indeed written by the mysterious Essenes. Eventually, the Essene Hypothesis developed as the most dominant explanation for the group behind the Dead Sea Scrolls. Of course, it was not a perfect theory. The scrolls never mention the word Essenes even once, and there is ongoing debate about whether these texts even describe a single uniform group. That said, many of the descriptions of the Essenes do seem to align to the community described in the scrolls, so we may not have enough evidence to be absolutely certain, but enough to be confident at the very least. Leaving aside the question of whether they were Essenes or not, there is another thing often wondered about the community behind the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why did they abandon their precious texts in desert caves? Well, it may have all to do with the abandoned ruins beside the caves of Qumran. You see, during the era of the scrolls' discovery, a team of French archaeologists investigated the ruins, looking for clues about the origins of the scrolls, and what they discovered was intriguing. You see, for a period in its history, the building appears to have been a religious site, with communal dining areas, dormitories, and even a ritual bath. A theory quickly developed. This was a monastery. However, whoever lived there seems to have abandoned the site in a hurry, and judging by a layer of ash dated to the 1st century, it may have been under violent circumstances. For those living in the province of Judea, 70 AD was a very bad year. You see, the people of Judea attempted to rise up against their Roman masters, hoping to break away from centuries of harsh oppression. But the Romans did not give up their conquered lands without a fight. Under the command of the emperor's son, Titus, legionaries were sent into the city of Jerusalem to quash the rebellion. And, according to Josephus, it was a massacre. The flame was carried a long way and made an echo together with the groans of those that were slain. One would have thought the whole city had been on fire, nor can one imagine anything either greater or more terrible than this noise. The Roman war machine utterly destroyed the city of Jerusalem, but worst of all, they tore the sacred temple to the ground and plundered its precious artifacts. Today, all that remains of this sacred building is the Western Wall, now a holy site in Judaism. But the violence did not end there. Fighting spread to towns and villages across the countryside, eventually reaching the Dead Sea community of Qumran. Fearing the loss of their sacred writings, the community seems to have hidden their scrolls in nearby caves, hoping to return to them after the fighting. But they never returned, and there the scrolls lay, undisturbed for millennia. The Jewish revolt and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD were among the most significant events in the histories of both Judaism but also Christianity. But as far as the Dead Sea Scrolls are concerned, this event may also explain why the scrolls were hidden in the first place, kept in desert caves for safekeeping. For those who witnessed the destruction firsthand, it must have felt like the end of the world, or perhaps the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. You see, the final scrolls in our journey seem to describe an apocalyptic war between angels and demons. When you look deeper into the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will find a world governed by spirits, often locked in an eternal struggle. In the community rule, there is a section known as the Treatise of the Two Spirits, which describes how two powerful angels influence human behavior. All the children of righteousness are ruled by the Prince of Light and walk in the ways of light, but all the children of falsehood are ruled by the angel of darkness and walk in the way of darkness. This text gives us an insight into the world of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is highly dualistic, meaning that everything is separated into good or evil. It's an idea that you find in many of the scrolls, and sometimes in the most unexpected of places. You see, one text describes a ranking system to assess whether somebody was good or evil, and they based it entirely on physical appearance. According to this text, if you were good-looking and had well-aligned teeth, then your soul likely came from the house of light. But if you had crooked teeth, hairy thighs, and thick toes, then your soul likely belonged to the house of darkness. It's a pretty damning assessment, and I'm starting to think they took the phrase "blessed with good looks" a little literally. But of all the angels and demons in the Dead Sea Scrolls, one diabolical figure seems to appear again and again. And I'm not talking about Satan, but another demon known as Belial. The demon Belial, or Belial, has an intriguing history in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He is a figure who appears throughout the texts like a haunting spectre, and is portrayed as the source of all evil in the world. But despite all that, I have a soft spot for this devil. You see, I once wrote a 20,000-word dissertation on this very figure and how it originated from a translational error. You see, in the very earliest biblical texts, well before the Dead Sea Scrolls, Belial was simply a Hebrew word meaning wickedness. In fact, a common insult was to call somebody a B'nai Belial, meaning a son of wickedness. Over time, people began to look at this word differently. Rather than being a word for wickedness, it became a name. So the phrase sons of wickedness was instead translated to sons of Belial, implying a group of people who pledged their allegiance to a demon. My research examined all 89 instances of the word Belial in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I noticed an unusual pattern. Across these texts, the word Belial gradually shifts from a word meaning wickedness to a name of a demon exclusively. In fact, by the later scrolls, Belial morphed into an arch-prince of darkness, a kind of Satan figure in the Dead Sea Scrolls. From a humble adjective to a demonic entity. It was a fun research paper. Now, this leads us nicely to the final scroll I want to introduce to you. You see, one of the most intriguing scrolls describes an apocalyptic war, but not one that is already past, one that is still yet to come. Known as the War Scroll, this text contains a prophecy of a world-ending conflict in the distant future. On one side are the sons of light, those who are loyal to God, and opposing them are the sons of darkness, loyal only to the demon Belial. Among their ranks are armies of the Kittim, a mysterious group believed to be a reference to the Romans. The War Scroll describes an apocalyptic confrontation that takes place over 40 years. The fighting is fierce, but no side manages to get an upper hand. However, in the final year, divine reinforcements are called. The armies of light are joined by the angels, led by the archangel Michael. Meanwhile, the armies of darkness are joined by the demons, including the diabolical Belial. After clashing once more, the two sides reach another stalemate, but then, finally, God intervenes. The great hand of God shall be lifted up against Belial and against all the forces of his dominion for an eternal slaughter. The War Scroll reveals the Dead Sea writings at their most dramatic. The authors behind it must have believed deeply that their world was governed by forces beyond their control, and that one day God would judge them in his wrath. Given the troubled times in which these texts emerged, I wonder whether the authors of the scrolls believed that this apocalyptic battle was taking place before their eyes. It's often said that good discoveries give us answers, but great discoveries give us more questions. Now, I'm not one to exaggerate, but in my opinion, the Dead Sea Scrolls are quite possibly some of the greatest discoveries ever made, and I hope my overview has revealed why these scrolls are so important for scholars and historians today. These ancient manuscripts contain the oldest biblical writings ever found and are an invaluable primary resource into how the biblical texts were edited, transmitted, and rewritten over time. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer us a window into the religious life of the Second Temple period. The various community writings reveal the inner thoughts of an ancient Jewish sect, one that's long suspected to be the Essenes, and how they lived, what they believed, and most importantly, what they feared. Now, if you're curious and would like me to explore any of these scrolls a little further, do let me know in the comments. The Dead Sea Scrolls are unique for many reasons, but they aren't the only lost texts to be reclaimed from the sands of time, and they are far from being the most controversial. That title goes to the Gnostic Gospels, a series of Christian writings that claim to reveal the forbidden teachings of Jesus, including one text known as the Gospel of Judas. Watch here to find out more. Hey, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. If you like this video and want to see more, why not subscribe? A like and a comment also go a really long way. And a big thank you to the patrons. So many of you have joined for bonus content and Q&As. Thank you. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.